Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again across the vast Louisiana plain, where we are elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism, marching along to the righteousness of God in fidelity to the United States Constitution, and slowly but surely, day by day, draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is The State of Freedom, brought to you by freedom-loving Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. We are so thrilled to be back with you today. We're so grateful for you and honored that you would have us along for part of your day. We are only here because of your prayers, your encouragement, your financial support, your friendship. If you're looking for a way to support us, to advertise with us, or to send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd also really appreciate it if you would help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom. So when you listen to this episode, if you like it, please share it with a couple people who you think might also like it. Like the show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it, and share it. And we always have the audio clips, some nice little bite-sized snacks for you from different episodes, from all the episodes on YouTube and Rumble, except for whenever YouTube puts us on suspension, in which case we are not there. But we're back right now. We're just going to be very careful about what we put up on YouTube. So if you are a faithful YouTube listener, please keep an eye out for extra episodes from on other platforms, because we may not always be there. And the links to our YouTube and Rumble platforms are always in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. Moms for Liberty East Baton Rouge Parish Chapter is dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend and take back their parental rights at all levels of government. To learn more or to get involved with Moms for Liberty East Baton Rouge, email momsforlibertybatonrouge@gmail.com. That's moms, the number 4, libertybatonrouge@gmail.com. The email address is on the Patriot page of our website, freedomstate.us, and it's in the show notes. Well, today we are finally beginning what many of you have been waiting for, the session in review. And today marks part 1 of a 3-part mini-series, because we are still working through all of the mounds and mounds of legislation that we followed. But we'll have a great show for you today. And before we dig into that, let me start with the scripture of the day. It's Psalms chapter 68, verses 19 and verse 35. And it says, "What a glorious God. He gives us salvation over and over. Then he daily carries our burdens." Pause in his presence. God, we are consumed with awe, trembling before you as your glory streams from your holy place. The God of power shares his mighty strength with Israel and with all his people. God, we give you our highest praise. And as I was reading this chapter, Psalm 68, this morning, I was really convicted by these passages, because I don't spend enough time in awe of the magnificence and majesty, the greatness and the power of the Lord. And these verses challenged me not just to focus on the personal one-on-one relationship with my Creator, but to zoom out and to dwell on his vastness, his greatness, and his power. As I spend time doing that, my personal relationship with the Lord becomes even more amazing. And it's something to be in real awe of, and something not to be taken for granted, because the God of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, the one who holds everything together and through whom everything that has been made was made, speaks to me. He cares for me. He left heaven and his throne to come to earth to stand in my place, to take on my sin, guilt, shame, disease, and die for me. He conquered death for me and opened the path to salvation for me. He strengthens me and he carries my burdens. It's absolutely incomprehensible, yet even a child can understand it and receive it. So dwell on the vastness of the Lord today. It will refresh your perspective on your life and your circumstances. Allow yourself to be amazed by the Lord and swept up in the wonder of him.
And I pray, Danielle, that when we look at God and all of his vastness, in all of his power, in all of his glory, that we would be able to have a simple understanding through his grace that a God that big, that vast, that powerful, that all consuming could nonetheless have a personal and an intimate I for me and for you and for each of us. It is, I pray for the grace to be able to accept his intimate personal love for me. Oftentimes, I look at the power, the omnipotence of God, his incredible majesty, and I ask myself, and I think David asked himself in the psalm, someone as great as you, why would you have regard for me, a sinner, a lowly human being who's flawed and imperfect? Why would you have an eye for me? Who are we that you would even regard us? Yet he does, not only collectively, but he regards us intimately and wants to have a relationship with each of us intimately, to relieve our burdens, to help us to understand that if we are able to surrender each concern, each worry, each anxiety to him, then he can transform it and use it to our benefit. He does say, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. And so I pray for the grace to be able to take that little step to Jesus, because sometimes even the small step of trust can be very difficult if you've been hurt or if you've been betrayed, and if really it's just very difficult to trust. So I pray for the grace that each of us would be able to take the little step just to trust in Jesus. And I ask Jesus to reveal himself to each of us and his precious love and healing to each of us. Because if we are able to accept that, then it is absolutely transformative in our lives and in our work.
It is. And Chris, as you were saying that, I was thinking that as we accept that, that is where David had his moment where he said, with you I can storm a troop, with you I can scale a wall, because the Lord's love strengthens us and empowers us to do the work that he's called us to do.
Yes, and it's not theoretical. It is real. It is real. These are not just prayer is not just a mechanical exercise. Prayer is not just something that we check off the list and say, "Okay, I got that out of the way." Prayer is a direct and intimate encounter with the Lord, and so I ask and pray and believe on that kind of intimate encounter, not only for you and me, Danielle, but for all of our listeners, and really for anybody in the world who is struggling with whatever burdens they carry.
Yeah, that's so awesome, Chris. And we, going forward, I think as a state have remarkably fewer burdens. Not we haven't zeroed them out by any stretch, but we have remarkably fewer burdens than we did going into this session and going into this 2024 calendar year. Because this legislative session, which started in March and ended last Monday, has just been blistering. It's been absolutely brutal. And really, truly, it started in January, right after the inauguration with that special session on redistricting, and moved right into the crime session after that. So we have just been running the gauntlet of legislative activity for the last 6 months straight. And today we're so proud to come and say we have a lot to be proud of. We have a lot to be thankful for from this regular session. The list of wins far outstrips the losses. And for those of you who have been with us through the regular session, you know that there were so many bills. I think probably around last count, we thought there were been over 1,400 filed. We were only able to track a fraction of them. And I mean a fraction. When I looked at the bills that we were tracking, and we didn't necessarily take a position on or push every single one of those. We may have never, ever mentioned them on the air, but the total number of all the bills that we followed closely as LACAG were over 130. And honestly, not all of those bear mentioning, but we still have over 80 bills that we will be bringing to you in this recap series. I think you'll really be pleased about a lot of it. And I wouldn't be talking about government. We wouldn't be talking about politics and politicians if some of it didn't make your blood boil. So we'll make sure you get to share in that with us as well.
Right. We will share the wealth. And I will say this, Danielle, despite the fact that, there were, as you said, close to 1,400 bills that were passed through, I would say that most of the ones that are most critical to liberty, to freedom, to the fundamental interests of Louisiana citizens, we were able to cover and follow and advocate on behalf of. So we really had to do a real streamlining, but we think we got most of the ones that were most fundamentally important.
Yes. And I'll also just add, we're still working through a lot of this. So I don't have good statistics for you today on the wins, the losses, what we killed, what we were able to fix and make acceptable. But we will be bringing those numbers to you as well, because I know you played a huge, huge part in making sure that the wins happened. And, I want you guys sharing the losses with us as well. And we're a big part of making sure that some really bad legislation got turned at least to neutral, and some of it even got turned to good. So we want to be sure and bring all those great numbers to you as well. And we'll do that by the third episode in this installment. But why don't we just get into it, Chris, if you're ready?
I'm ready. Let's lock, load, and launch.
All right. Well, let's start with a topic that is at the top of everybody's mind. And if you listen to our last episode with Frank Gaffney, it was discussed at length, and that's immigration. There's two bills that were related to immigration that we want to recap and review. The first one is Senate Bill 279 by Senator Mike Facey, and it was his bill to get illegal immigrants off of the roads in Louisiana. This bill failed in the Senate Transportation Committee. And Chris, remind us why that failed.
The bill failed in committee, Danielle, because there were concerns among some Democrats and even a couple of more liberal Republicans about whether or not this would create a pretext to stop people who were driving along the roads in order to determine whether or not they are driving illegally. So there was a probable cause issue here that they were concerned about. But generally, the only time that people would have been able to be questioned on the side of the road would be if they had been in an accident. And if they had been in an accident, then law enforcement would be able to inquire about whether or not they were in the United States legally. And if it was determined that they were not present in the United States legally, then law enforcement would have been required to report that status to ICE. And ultimately, if they were convicted of not being in the United States legally, they could have been fined $500 and even imprisoned for up to 90 days. It is one of those bills that should have passed. But again, the concern they had was that there would be a pretext stop where an officer really did not have reasonable suspicion to stop a vehicle that did so and ended up getting information about their status in a way that was unconstitutional. But because it really only involved if you were involved in a car accident, when you're involved in a wreck, a law enforcement officer certainly has a right to ask you if you're in the United States legally, what your immigration status is, and that sort of thing. So really the argument against it was not meritorious. However, the bill did fail in the committee, but I believe that Senator Facey is absolutely going to bring this bill back next year. One of the reasons I think, Danielle, why the bill failed in deference to the committee members who were against it was that there was another bill that we'll talk about in a minute, and that was Valerie Hodges' SB 388, which really does generally cover the issues that were raised in Senator Facey's bill, SB 279.
Yeah, Chris, I find the hypocrisy of some of our legislators to really be mind-blowing sometimes, because this bill failed in Senate Transportation. And I will remind people that Senate Transportation did not ask those same questions about Senator McMath's bill for criminalizing handheld cell phone device use while driving. And if you are driving in a manner, and Chris, this is probably not just for accidents, right? I'm sure if you get pulled over for any reason, if you're speeding, if you're driving recklessly, law enforcement has a right to ask some questions at that point. And one of them may as well be if you're here legally or not. And so the fact that the legislators, the senators on Senate transportation had a problem with that when it meant making our roads safer from illegal immigrants who may be driving dangerously, who may be transporting minors illegally, who may be doing any manner of wrongdoing, but did not have the same questions to ask for Senator McMath's Senate Bill 98 to criminalize handheld cell phone device use by otherwise law-abiding American citizens. I take real issue with that.
I take issue with it too, and I really believe that the reason why SB 98, Senator McMath's cell phone bill, did not receive the same level of scrutiny was that law-abiding citizens who are operating a handheld cell phone and get cited for it are very, very likely to pay the fines associated with it, are very likely to be in a position to generate revenue for the state and for insurance companies. Whereas illegal immigrants who are on the roads illegally either may not be able to be located for a court date or may not have the resources to pay the fines associated with it. And so maybe the legislature concluded, the committee, that it was not worth their time because the possibility for revenue generation was not the same under Senator Fessie's bill. That may be a jaded way of looking at it, but I can assure you that that was not irrelevant to their consideration.
Regardless of what the issue was and however they justified this in their minds, I can say that Senator Fassie did tell us that he was hoping to get it added to Senate Bill 388 by Senator Hodges as an amendment, but that did not end up happening. But Chris, Senator Hodges' bill was criminalizing the entry or re-entry of any illegal alien into Louisiana. We obviously supported that bill. Does you think it covers Senator Fassie's concerns? The bill, it covers the marks that Senator Fassie's bill would have done.
Generally so, not directly, but generally so, because Senator Hodges' SB 388 criminalized, as you said, unlawful entry or reentry into the United States. Anyone who's found in the state of Louisiana illegally can be arrested and prosecuted for it. And a first-time offense, you can do up to 6 months in prison for it and pay a $1,000 fine. And second or subsequent offenses, you can do a minimum of a year in prison. You would do a minimum of a year in prison and up to a $10,000 fine. So while it doesn't directly address the core of Senator Fassie's bill, it certainly does a lot to cover the same issues because it makes it a criminal act to be in the country, and specifically in the state of Louisiana, illegally, subject to arrest, fine, and even imprisonment. And that bill, SB 388, from what I understand, Danielle, has been signed by the governor. Is that right?
I have seen that it's been sent to the governor. I have not seen where it's been signed by the governor. But Chris, is this something where ICE can get involved? Will they, when an illegal alien is identified as being here illegally, is it just the burden of Louisiana taxpayers to put these people in our jails and pay for it? Or is there some kind of, will they be shipped back to their country of origin?
There will be a collaborative effort on the part of the state and the federal government to pay for any housing or for any imprisonment. The bill will require law enforcement to notify ICE of the illegal and unlawful presence. And there's a mechanism set up in the bill for communication and collaboration between Louisiana law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. And so it's very good. And interestingly, Danielle, the bill also provides for an interstate compact among Louisiana and other border states to communicate directly with those border states and to work together and collaboratively to make sure that people who are in the United States illegally are expeditiously deported. Because obviously this is not a problem only in Louisiana. It's a problem big time in border states and other states throughout the country. So I like the fact that the bill provides a mechanism for streamlined communications among Louisiana authorities and authorities in other states.
Yeah. And I would say, even though there is a burden to the Louisiana taxpayer on this, we would far, far prefer to pay for them to be in jail than to pay for them to be roaming the streets, possibly committing violent crimes. It seems like one way or the other, we may be paying for their housing until the grown-ups really show up in Washington.
The grown-ups, exactly. And it's time for the grown-ups to show up, at which the Biden administration at least has absolutely not shown up. This bill, Danielle, this SB 388 is a direct response to the fact that the states generally are bearing the consequences of illegal immigration, and the federal government is simply not doing its job.
Yep. Well, this bill did not face really any serious opposition. The opposition to it in the House was by Democrats, but several of them joined the Republicans in support of this. The Democrats who supported it in the House were Roy Adams, Chad Brown, Robbie Carter, and Travis Johnson. And in the Senate, it was a strict party line vote. And as we said, Chris, this one has been sent to the governor. So looking
Yes.
for that to get signed or just to become law any day now. I think the deadline for kind of the tail end of the bills that were passed at the end of the session to be signed or become law, or the deadline for veto, is June 24th, 25th, right around in there.
Yeah, it's 20 days. Is it 20 days from the date the bill is sent to the governor's desk?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
exactly.
And the last thing I want to mention here, just parenthetically, is Roy Adams, because his name appears more and more frequently crossing over to vote on good legislation, even though he's a Democrat. I spoke to him recently at the legislature not long ago, and I cannot wait to have him on the show and have a real discussion with him, because I'm very impressed with a lot of things that he's done and his willingness to cross over the line when he sees legislation that's good.
Yeah, and I'll also just echo that and say that not just Roy Adams, but all four of these gentlemen, you'll hear their names a lot in the next couple of episodes, because they cross party lines pretty frequently when it means something to them. So glad to see that. All right, well, let's move on to the topic of state sovereignty, and this is a topic that was pretty strongly supported by both parties. The first bill up is Senate Bill 208. By Senator Miguez, and this is his bill that provides for sanctuary policies, or the restriction of sanctuary cities in Louisiana.
Strictly prohibits any sanctuary policy in Louisiana for illegal immigrants. And it specifically requires law enforcement agencies not to implement, either as a matter of formal policy or customary policy, any practice of providing sanctuary for illegal immigrants. It requires law enforcement to report the status of an illegal immigrant to federal immigration authorities. It requires a judge to read into the court record and make sure the court record reflects the status of an illegal immigrant. And it allows the Attorney General to take injunctive action to enforce this law or to prevent a violation. In other words, if there's any law enforcement authority or any local municipality that is implementing a sanctuary policy for illegal immigrants, it allows the Attorney General to take action to enjoin that and to stop that. So this is a strong bill to protect Louisiana citizens from an en masse presence of illegal immigrants in our state, and gives them the mechanism to get them out of here expeditiously. So Senator Miguez is everything that Senator Miguez does is strong and has teeth, and this bill is certainly no exception.
Yeah, and the Senate voted on party lines with the notable absence of Republican Bob Owen for the vote. It's notable because he has had a track record in the past of being absent for important votes. This one may not be one that he was absent on purpose for, but we'll mention it anyway. And in the House, it was a near party line vote with Democrats Chad Brown, Marcus Bryant, and Travis Johnson joining the Republicans in favor. It was signed by the governor on May 28th and was effective immediately. So no
Yes.
sanctuary cities in Louisiana. That's awesome.
That's awesome. And I do believe that Senator Bob Owen has absolutely earned, even if on this particular vote his absence was innocent, certainly has earned the moniker No Show and Owen.
That's right. All right. Next up is House Bill 238 by Representative Michael Echols, who we had on the show not too long ago. So if you didn't catch that episode, please go back and listen to it. I think it was a really great one. And his bill prohibits foreign adversaries from buying agricultural land in Louisiana.
Yeah. And he designates in the bill prohibited foreign actors or foreign adversaries. And these are countries that are on the United States State Department list of foreign adversaries, sworn enemies of the United States. None of these entities, none of these countries can acquire in any way, lease agricultural property in the state of Louisiana. And if they do so, a violation, there is up to a $50,000 fine for that. And the Attorney General can bring action to require the illicit purchaser to give up the property within 1 year of the judgment of the injunction action. So it's a strong bill. It will both deter illicit foreign actors from acquiring land in Louisiana or trying to, and it will impose significant penalties as well as divestiture of the property if it's determined that they've done so, and that action would be through the Attorney General. So it's a very good bill. Senator Echols talked about that bill recently on our show, and I would encourage our listeners to listen to the episode with Senator Echols because he really talks about it in some detail.
Yes, and this was a highly bipartisan supported bill. The Senate voted unanimously in favor, and we've seen the Senate really become a lot more conservative this year. There's a lot of unanimous voting in the Senate that kind of caught me off guard, but very happy to see that. And 7 Democrats opposed the bill in the House. And because this, I can't understand any opposition to this bill to say that we don't want people who hate us and wish us dead to be able to buy agricultural land in our state. I will name them because I just find it so offensive. They are Delisha Boyd, Barbara Carpenter, Kyle Green, Mandy Landry, Tammy Phelps, Sylvia Taylor, Matthew Willard. And if any of those are your legislator, please call them and ask for an explanation on why they think people that want us dead should be able to buy land in our state, because that's just absolutely beyond the pale to me. A number of people were absent for the vote in the House, and I'll just list those because this was such an important vote. And they were Chance Henry, Big John Ilg, and Jeremy Lacombe. And the last 2 of those, you're going to hear their name on the absent list quite a bit. So want to make that underline here. This bill was signed by the governor on June 6th and becomes effective on August 1st.
And I want to say, Danielle, along the lines of SB 238, that you're right. This is a bipartisan bill. It doesn't really matter whether you're a Democrat or a legislature. Everyone has a vested interest in making sure that our foreign enemies are not acquiring agricultural property in the interior of our state. It goes to our infrastructure. It goes to our food and water supply. It goes to our way of life. It goes to our way of life. And so it would be interesting to get some kind of an explanation on the part of these Democrats why they would oppose this legislation, and really an explanation from these Republicans who were absent, not necessarily saying their absence was nefarious because the bill did pass comfortably. But nonetheless, I think if I'm a legislature, particularly a Republican legislature, I think that's the kind of bill that I would want to register my voice on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get going on Senate Bill 133. That is the one by Senator Presley. We spent a lot of time on that bill this session. We've had lots of guests on the show come in and talk about how Louisiana was leading the pack, not just the country, but the world with this legislation. We're so proud that it passed and has been signed by the governor. We'll get to that just in a minute. But this bill is the one that asserts state sovereignty and says that no international organization has jurisdiction in Louisiana. nor will Louisiana enforce any decree or regulation by organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, or the World Economic Forum. I'm just so proud that we could be a leader in something like this, Chris.
Absolutely, and it is, as you said, Danielle. It's a bill that received national attention. Our state has been a pioneer in this legislation. The way Senator Presley navigated this bill through the legislative process was just so impressive. Was able to explain in a methodical way, in a diplomatic way, why it is so important that the people who were making decisions for Louisiana citizens regarding how we respond to health pandemics and health emergencies, those decisions should be made by the representatives of Louisiana citizens right here in our capital, the ones who are accountable to us, and not by international health bureaucrats. And he explained that very clearly. So pleased that this bill passed, and I can tell you that the importance of it, the critical importance of it, will come to be known probably in the coming months, certainly within the next year or two, why it's so important to have this legislation in place.
Yes, and it was signed by the governor on May 28th, and it became effective that day. So I don't want to say we're in the clear, but we have what we need to push back against those forces codified, right?
Absolutely. And it is, like you said, we're not in the clear, but we certainly are in a much, much better position than we were before this bill passed.
Yeah. All right. Next up is Senate Bill 232 by Senator Mark Abraham, and it established gold and silver as legal tender.
Yep. Gold and silver as legal tender in the state of Louisiana, which is a very, very good step in the direction of being able to establish gold and silver as transactional currency in Louisiana to be used just like fiat money, just like the dollar. So a great step there. The one issue that I had about some of the language in the legislation was that the legislation says that no person shall incur any liability for refusal to accept recognized legal tender for payment of debts, except as provided by contract. So if gold and silver is legal tender in Louisiana, you would think that people would be required to recognize it and accept it in payment of debts. However, I can understand on a practical level how that might be difficult to work out. If you're going in to pay for a car and you're bringing a gold brick and the person selling you your vehicle is not in a position, does not have the apparatus to be able to accept that as a transactional process. I understand that, and I think that that's really kind of an important provision in the bill until we come to a point where we really flesh out the mechanism of transactional currency in Louisiana and how it's all going to work. But the bill is good insofar as it codifies recognition in Louisiana of gold and silver as legal tender.
Yes, and this one was super non-controversial. It had almost unanimous votes in the House and the Senate. One dissenting vote was Representative Polly Thomas, and I just mention this because she asked a question in the committee hearing on Representative Cruz's transactional gold and silver bill about how buying gold would lower the price of milk. And I don't understand how she wants to stand. I'm not sure why she's taking her stand on this issue. That's also a question that shows that the basics of economics are not well understood. But anyway, I just wanted to pull out that there was only one person who voted against this, and I would stand to say that there was not truly a good reason for that. However, it was signed by the governor regardless of her opposition, and it was made effective on August 1st.
And I'm with you, Danielle. I don't understand either the nature of her question or how it was relevant to whether or not gold and silver should be recognized as legal tender in Louisiana. I don't think that perhaps she fully understood the issue. I do want to say about Representative Thomas that when it came to issues this session on redistricting, issues related to expanding or creating new minority judicial districts in Louisiana. She was very strong on that against the racial gerrymandering. And so I do want to give Representative Thomas credit for always standing tall on the redistricting issues. But on this particular issue regarding gold and silver, I'm not sure she fully understands the issue. But perhaps with more education, she will next year when we are going to hopefully, as we're about to discuss, make gold and silver transactional currency in the state of Louisiana.
Yes. And one thing we can also say about Representative Thomas is that she was at least consistent in her position. We could say that that might not be the case about some of the people who opposed Representative Cruz's House Bill 714, which was his transactional gold and silver bill. We were strong supporters of that. We had him on the show to talk about it. We had Treasurer Dr. John Fleming on the show to talk about that. And we had Jason Cousins, the CEO of Glint, a company that's already doing transactional gold via debit card, on the show to talk about how his technology works. So we are huge supporters in that. We are big believers in the importance of diversifying your portfolio and protecting your future from the dollar that seems to be losing value daily as we see inflation on the rise, regardless of what the Biden administration says. I think I saw a report yesterday, Chris, that said that inflation was down to 3.3%. Well, my wallet tells me otherwise. The gas pump tells me otherwise. My grocery bills tell me otherwise. So thank you very much for telling me how to think and what to think, Biden administration. But I think I will believe my eyes over your reports.
Yes.
So
we're being told that the sun is shining and it's a beautiful, cool day, yet my ears tell me that I'm hearing thunder and lightning and rain pouring down onto my roof. So who do we believe? Yes, the wallet says very differently. I do want to say, Danielle, on HB 714, Representative Cruz's bill, that Treasurer Fleming, as well as Representative Cruz, gave a very, very good, strong explanation before the House Commerce Committee about transactional currency in Louisiana, why it's so important, how it's already being, at least formulated in Texas, and just why it's so important. And they did a wonderful job on it. And the reason why it failed, and we know this with absolute authority at this point, was because the bankers came out against it. It was strictly the bankers. It wasn't Louisiana citizens. 9 out of 10 Louisiana citizens support transactional currency, gold and silver in Louisiana. But that's why it failed, because of the banker lobby in the legislature. No question about it.
It's true. It failed in House Commerce, as you said, and only 2 Republicans supported the bill. Danny McCormick, who did so very, very strongly, and he had so much insight to offer as a sitting member of the committee. It was almost as if he was testifying in favor of the bill because he was so well versed on this issue. Dixon McMakin also supported the bill. And the Republicans who voted against it, and I'm listing these so you can keep this in your mind if any of these are your representative, they are Kim Carver, Vincent Cox, Paula Davis, Jessica Domingue, Troy Hebert, Stephanie Hilferty, Jacob Landry, Neil Reiser, Vincent St. Blanc, and Polly Thomas all voted against it and sided with the bankers. So that was super disappointing. Honestly, it was crushing to me. I thought that we could really get this one done and be the first in the nation to have this ability. But alas, the legislature stood against it. Chris, I want to also just take this moment to make a shameless plug. If any of our listeners are investing in precious metals or interested in investing in precious metals to protect your future, please reach out to me. You can email me at danielle@freedomstate.us. I'm working with a company called Metal Stacks, and they have the best prices on the market. So you can either buy directly through my affiliate website, or if you're interested in being involved in that kind of business and doing referrals and getting some extra money on the side that way, reach out to me, because we would love to have you as part of our team, part of the people who believe in the power of gold and silver and making sure that your future is protected. So,
and now is the time to do it.
Yeah.
There is no better time to do it than now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, moving on to another reason to help fortify your future, this central bank digital currency. House Bill 357, brought by Representative Beryl Amity for the second year in a row, it would prohibit CBDC from being used in a commercial deposit account. And she was on the show recently, Chris, explaining how that mechanism actually would work. And so if you missed that episode, please go back and check it out. I think it's a pretty short one. So I think you'll enjoy it. And she does a very good job of explaining what the mechanism actually is.
And it's a surgical strike. It's not a broad strike, but it is a very important surgical strike against central bank digital currency in Louisiana, as you said, by prohibiting CBDC from being included within the definition of a commercial deposit account. And that is really, really important. This CBDC, Danielle, from an economic and really from a freedom perspective, is so nefarious, such a threat to our economic sovereignty and security that we have to be vigilantly opposing anything related to CBDC in Louisiana. Representative Amity is way out in front of it, and applaud her for getting this through. And this is a very good step in the right direction.
Yes, it is. And a bill that's very similar. Well, let me also say that there was strong bipartisan support for this. It passed the House 99-5 with 5 Democrats who apparently want the government to be able to track every aspect of our lives and apparently their own spending habits as well. So let me list those out. They were Wilford Carter, Amy Freeman, Ed Larvadane, Pat Moore, and Sylvia Taylor. All want the government to be able to track all of the things that we do and spend money on. So you can call them up and thank them for that. It was signed by the governor on June 3rd and will become effective on August 1st.
Yeah, and I want to mention before we move on, Danielle, that the vast majority of the bills that we're talking about here, not all, but most were supported by us. We weighed in on most of these bills. We were actively engaged in them.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one we supported as well. It is House Bill 488. It was Representative Wright's Blockchain Basics Bill, and it establishes the rights of Louisiana citizens to trade, mine, and operate nodes for digital currency. This one, I really surprisingly passed through House Commerce with no questions and passed the House floor with very little fanfare. I think it saw a lot of changes over in the Senate, Chris, but you believe it's still a strong bill.
I do. It prohibits a governing authority from accepting or requiring central bank digital currency and from participating in any test of CBDC by any branch of the federal government. Very, very important. And as you said, also establishes that the government cannot prohibit use of digital assets for the purchase of goods and services. I applaud Representative Wright for bringing this bill. And again, it is another legislative recognition of the dangers of CBDC and how we have to be on guard against it and not allow it to get a foothold in our state.
Yeah. Well, I'm so thankful that he brought it. He spoke very, very eloquently and fluently about digital currency in the House committee hearing that I saw. And so I'm pretty impressed with that. Okay, well, let's switch gears and talk about private property rights. There were quite a number of bills that addressed that this session or aimed to address that this session. Let's start out with House Bill 58 by Representative Bacala. This is his anti-squatter bill, and it was really just an elegant change to existing law, Chris. It's not creating something out of thin air.
It's not creating something out of thin air, but typically prior to the passage of this bill, HB 58, if someone was found unlawfully on someone else's property, whether it be commercial or residential, well, they had to go through sort of a civil process to get them out of there, to get them evicted. It was not considered a crime on which law enforcement would typically act. So what this bill does is simply add squatting, which is being located and found on someone else's property and refusing to leave their property. It makes it now an element of the crime of simple burglary, which would allow law enforcement to immediately arrest that individual, to remove them from the property, and even to prosecute them for simple burglary. And so it streamlines the process whereby a property owner can remove a squatter from their property. As we've talked about before, Danielle, this is probably not the problem here in Louisiana now that it is in certain other states, but this legislation is preemptive. It suggests great foresight on the part of Representative Bacala, and it's good to have this in place when and if this does become a significant problem in Louisiana, which it certainly could in light of the numbers of illegal immigrants pouring into our country at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And this bill was passed unanimously by both chambers. It was signed by the governor on May 23rd and becomes effective on August 1st. So that's very exciting and encouraging. Next up, Chris, is House Bill 729 by Representative Carter. His bill would have ended eminent domain for carbon capture. It didn't really make it to a real hearing because there were other competing bills that were attempting to do something very similar. Did you have anything you wanted to mention about Representative Carter's bill?
I just wanted to say that Representative Carter brought this last year, and it was defeated in the House Natural Resources Committee last year. It was not called this year because there were some other eminent domain bills that were going through. But I will say that Representative Carter's bill, it was actually the best bill being put forward regarding eminent domain on carbon capture sequestration, because it would have categorically prohibited the use of eminent domain by private corporations in order to expropriate property for CCS. So it was a very, very good bill, did not get through. And, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to stop carbon capture sequestration in Louisiana or even expropriation of property for it. However, there were a couple of other bills that were brought by Representative Guyman that certainly will help property owners when it comes to that process. And so that is good.
Yep. And the next bill that was brought by Representative Danny McCormick would have also been a fantastic protection for property owners when it comes to this carbon capture expropriation. His was House Bill 783, and it would have just ensured that property owners would be paid the maximum value for any property expropriated for carbon capture, which seems pretty straightforward and unobjectable, but it was objected to quite strongly.
It was objected to quite strongly. And the reason why it was objected to is that they want the people who are attempting to expropriate property under one of Representative Guyman's bills that passed. It requires 75% of landowners within a given unit. In other words, within the parameters of property that would be affected by a carbon capture sequestration project, any affected landowner, 75% of the landowners within that, quote, unit would have to agree to the expropriation in order for the expropriation to go forward, which is a good piece of legislation. But the 25% Representative McCormick's bill would have required that the 25% who, or anybody in the unit that does not agree to the expropriation, to be compensated in amount no less than the maximum amount that's paid to any other landowner, including landowners who do agree to the expropriation. So basically, as you said, Danielle, it would have established a very level playing field to make sure that all affected property owners are compensated fairly and equitably, and that the people who do agree to an expropriation of their land are not compensated more or better than those who don't. This was a good piece of legislation and should have passed. Unfortunately, it didn't. I believe the House Natural Resources Committee, unfortunately, is deeply committed and invested to this carbon capture sequestration, and they're really not willing to do much much to prevent it from occurring. I am thankful for Representative Guyman's bills, though.
Well, hold on, Chris. No, it did get out of the House Natural Resources Committee. It failed on the House floor. And
Oh, that's right.
it was
That's
in a
right.
41 to 47 vote, and a lot of Republicans voted against it, and a lot of them were absent. And I just have to say that there's really no explanation other than the carbon capture lobby must not want to have to pay people maximum value that give them trouble. So I want to list out the Republicans who voted against it because they were obviously leaned on by the carbon capture lobby. Because why would they vote against their constituents? This is a clear vote against the people who are having their land grabbed by the state to chase after this fake dream of green energy. Just carbon capture gets really under my skin because we know that it's not real. So anyway.
Yes. And I had this confused. You're right with Representative Carter's bill. This bill did get out of Natural Resources Committee. You're exactly right. And apparently came fairly close to passage on the floor.
It didn't come close enough, though. So the Republicans who voted against it were Tony Bacala, Jacob Broad, Rhonda Butler, Josh Carlson, Vincent Cox, Paula Davis, Jason DeWitt, Jessica Domingue, Foy Gadberry, Troy Hebert, Chance Henry, Stephen Jackson, Big John Ilg, Mike Johnson, Tim Kerner, Jeremy Lacombe, Jacob Landry, Dixon McMakin, Brock Myers, Joe Augeron, Neil Reiser, Lori Schlegel, Vincent St. Blanc, Polly Thomas, Debbie Villio, and Zizarang. That is a long list of Republican opposition to something that is really, truly a no-brainer and just a very straightforward, honest bill. There were also a number of Republicans who were absent. The absent votes could not have overturned it, but I will list them out anyway. They were Larry Bagley, Emily Chenevere, Speaker DeVilliers, Daryl Desautels, Les Farnham, Stephanie Hilferty, Dodie Horton, Jack McFarland, Wayne McMahon, Michael Mellerin, Chuck Owen, Troy Romero, and Chris Taylor. And what I will say about a number of those who are on the absent list is that they have really never made the absent list before. So, and they have a good track record. Dodie Horton, Emily Chenevere, Chuck Owen, have basically pristine records. So this is not to say that they were out there trying to do, to miss out on this vote. I'm sure they had somewhere else that they needed to be at the time, but they were absent for the vote, and the vote did fail. So it bears mentioning.
Yes, it does bear mentioning. I will reemphasize your point a minute ago. Why would particularly any Republican, not want to make sure that landowners who are subject to CCS expropriation not be maximally compensated for their property if it's being taken from them, particularly including those who may have opposed the expropriation within the unit? Everybody should be treated fairly. There's no question about that. And so hopefully this bill will be brought again next year, and hopefully we can put enough pressure on the legislature to get this passed and through, because it really is fair and will provide equitable treatment of all property owners who may be subject to CCS expropriation.
Yeah. And Chris, as you were alluding to, Representative Guyman made big leaps forward for us to basically put us in a position to deal with carbon capture. Maybe we don't agree with it. Maybe a lot of people don't agree with it. I would venture to say most citizens of Louisiana most likely do not agree with this carbon capture thing. I think some people can understand that it may be a quote unquote necessary evil to keep our oil industry, our pipeline industry in motion until they can get back to the business of actually drilling for oil, natural gas, and fracking. But this does take us forward, and it does move us away from just straight eminent domain, the government taking your property, whether you like it or not, for this horrible idea of carbon capture. So a great deal of debt is owed to Representative Guyman for really spending the time on this, working out, hammering out the details with industry to make something palatable available to the legislature, and they did pass it. So he had a set of bills, House Bill 492 and House Bill 696. The first one repeals eminent domain for carbon capture, and the second provides the method for unitization for carbon capture. This is a similar mechanism, as we understand it, that the oil industry uses for leases. And both of those had pretty strong support in both the House and the Senate.
Yes, and just collectively and in summary form, Representative Guyman's package of legislation establishes the units, which are basically the collective property that is subject to a particular CCS project, and requires a threshold percentage of landowners to agree to the expropriation. And if they don't, then the land can't be expropriated. But it creates, his legislation creates significant impediments and certain requirements for private corporations to expropriate private property for CCS. And a 75% threshold, Danielle, is significant. There's no question about that. So it does create an obstacle, and you can't just go in at this point and say, the mineral department in Louisiana, the commissioner has said that, we need this property for this project, and therefore we're going to give you an opportunity to agree to it. If you don't, we're going to expropriate it. No, it requires 75% of the landowners in the effective area. This is a good bill. And again, hopefully it can even be improved upon more next year. Everybody knows, Danielle, at this point, that carbon capture sequestration is a racket. Even the people who vote for it understand that this was never properly vetted in the legislature. It's not a public good. It's a federally subsidized boondoggle that would have absolutely no legs, no feet, no energy if it were strictly dependent upon private enterprise to go forward. But because of the massive federal subsidies associated with it, it's being propped up for that reason. And it's very, very difficult for these legislators to oppose it for that reason, because of the massive amount of money that's being thrown at it. It's a money racket.
It is. I mean, it's an unproven Ponzi scheme, Chris, that I think that is taking manpower away from the oil industry. However, I mean, the silver lining is that it is at least a transferable skill, so that our oil industry guys and ladies are not being completely stripped of their jobs while we're chasing after this little unicorn that the federal government has put in front of everybody. With its big bags of cash that are being drugged behind it. This is at least, I feel like, a stopgap mechanism to retain some jobs in Louisiana in the short term until we can have some reasonable reality brought back. If the powers of economics, if were to actually be in play here, and they were not subverted by the federal government and completely messed with by the federal government, we would be in far, far different position right now.
I don't see it ending well for many different reasons. But in the short term, the silver lining is that it will create a lot of jobs for Louisiana families, Louisiana citizens, which in the short term, I suppose, is a relatively good thing.
Yeah. Now, Chris, I know we had plenty more that we wanted to cover in this episode, but I think, why don't we just wrap it up here and pick back up for the next episode? There may be extra episodes that we thought we could get this done in 3 episodes, but it may take 4 or 5 at the rate that we're going. So we will bring the next episode to you on Monday, and we will start out with a fantastic set of bills, starting with personal liberty as the main topic, and going down from there. And I'm just so grateful, Chris, for what we've been able to accomplish. I think the bills that we walk through today they've encouraged me. To see so many wins is so encouraging. To see the legislature shift, especially to see the difference in the tone and tenor of the Senate. The House as well, but the Senate was really pretty unified this session in a way that we haven't seen in a positive way before. So super grateful for that. And we just have a lot more to get through that we hope will be encouraging to you. We hope that it will make you proud of where Louisiana is going, of what your elected officials are doing for you.
Yeah, and very thankful that we were able, and we're going to talk about these bills in another show. Certain bills, Danielle, more bills, obviously, we're able to help get through very important bills, but also some very significant bills that LACAG was able to work hard and defeat that were very, very, very harmful bills. No question about that. But none of this could be accomplished without the support, the dedication, and the loyalty and the action of LACAG members and State of Freedom listeners and supporters. There's just no question about it. And even the bills, Danielle, the ones we talked about today and others that we'll talk about in the future, the ones that maybe did not get through, every time you plant seeds in terms of trying to move legislation forward, not everything gets through the first time. But believe me, there is next year. The precedent has been set. We know where the votes went, who voted for, who voted against, and we are in a much better position as far as the landscape to get these bills through next year. And believe me, we will be there front and center next year as well. But I don't like to ever close a show, Danielle, here without personally thanking our growing army of LACAG supporters and listeners, our growing army of TSOF subscribers, supporters, and listeners. We really are becoming the voice of constitutional conservatism in Louisiana across the state, expanding rapidly everywhere. People in the legislature also now certainly know who LACAG is. They certainly are reaching out to us to see where we stand, where we come down on issues. We are continuing to develop great relationships with legislators, continuing to push them to do the right thing, and we are creating real transparency in the legislature. I could not be more optimistic about where we are and where we are headed.
Yeah, and also to the listeners, Chris, just you guys have become our family. I mean, we would not be where we are if it wasn't for you. We would not have had the wins we had this session if it was not for your engagement, your support. You're taking action at the LACAG Action Center. So we're so grateful for you. And this is a collective effort. This is not just the Chris and Danielle effort. We are the mouthpiece for the effort, and we are shining light on the effort. And we're hopefully bringing you lots of great insights and sharing, some insider things that we get to hear because Chris is spending so much time at the legislature. But we could not have had any of these big wins without your engagement. So, I mean, I can't say it enough. We just have so much to be proud of. And if you would like to keep up with what we're doing, I think I've mentioned this recently, but now the scriptures of the day and the reflections are posted on freedomstate.us. So if you go to freedomstate.us, you can review the scriptures that I bring to each episode. Those are there for you. Of course, if you want to get in touch with us, if you want to share with us ideas about possible guests for the show, possible topics for the show, if you have any questions you'd like to ask us, send us a note. You can do that right from freedomstate.us. If you want to support us, you can do that there as well. And I'd also like to just put a plug in for this. Please get some copies of General Flynn's movie, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. He's such a champion. He's such a warrior. He's been through so much and is continuing to go through so much. And he is fighting for the future of this country. So I think his story is such an important one to understand. I was a little bit out to lunch on politics at the time that a lot of his trials and tribulations happened in the 2016, 2017 timeframe, and up really to 2019, I think was where the majority of the action in the movie takes place. But I just can't speak highly enough of it. He's been so gracious to make us affiliate partners. So if you buy a DVD directly through his website or merch or whatever you buy, he gives us a percentage of that to support us as well. So grateful for that. And please, of course, visit LACAG.org. You can keep on top of what the latest is that we are doing. Most of Chris's testimony has now been posted to LACAG.org. So if you want to see what Chris looks like in action, if you wanted to catch some of his testimony on some of the bills that were important to you, you can see how he's been fighting for you at the legislature. And that's just at LACAG.org. And the Action Center is not shut down yet. We are still pushing for one more action, and that is that we're asking the governor to veto House Bill 461. We didn't get to it yet. It was supposed to be in this episode, but it will be in the next episode. And that is a bill that obscures public records that are valued at more than public negotiations. Chris, help me out here.
Yeah, I need the listeners, Danielle, to understand just how nefarious HB 461 is. As you said, it's the last bill of this session that is still pending because the governor has not yet signed that bill. And this legislation will conceal from public scrutiny negotiations regarding our money between local and municipal government authorities and private contractors for economic development. There is no reason why those negotiations involving how our money is going to be spent and to whom our money is going to go should be shielded from public scrutiny. And nobody has been able to give me a good explanation for that. The bill does say that once the negotiations are over and everything's done, well, then it all becomes public. But the public has a right not only to know about what happened after the fact, the public has a right to influence how their money is spent before it is spent, before the contracts are consummated. And that's the problem with the legislation. So we strongly encourage our listeners to go to LACAG.org and do the action item HB 461, encourage Governor Landry to veto that bill. It will diminish transparency and it will create an opportunity for public corruption and backroom dealing, and we don't want it. Please go to the Action Center, HB 461, and oppose it. If that's the one thing you do when you hear this episode, please go do that. It's really, really important.
Yep. We want to flood Governor Landry's inbox with opposition to this because we know that the lobby for this is pretty strong because who's it protecting? It's protecting politicians at the local level and it's protecting big contractors. So those are the folks who stand to gain. And we know that they are, in fact, they have clearly leaned on the legislature and then if this doesn't get vetoed, we will know that they have also leaned on the governor, but it seems pretty obvious that they have.
It seems pretty obvious that they have, but you know what, Danielle? If people continue to take do the cause of action, people continue to reach out to Governor Landry, encouraging a veto of HB 461, we not only have a fighting chance of securing a veto on this legislation, but we know if it occurs that we will have taken yet another step to preserve the grand state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.